So let's take a look through these directions here. What we're working on is just understanding a really basic concept, but when it comes to executing it, it's going to be one of the more challenging things you do this year, because what you're learning to do is kind of think outside your own head, which as a skill in life is really important, to be able to think through other people's eyes or think through an experience beyond your own. And it's something that gets easier over time as you get older, actually. But we're going to start with that right now, and we're going to start with it when we think about using evidence in your writing. And so one important thing to do as a writer is to be able to give the evidence that you use in your writing context, what's called context. And what context means is that is you explain the evidence you use in such a way that anyone, even if they hadn't read the text you're using as evidence, would understand what you're talking about. One big goal in writing in general is that when you write stuff, you kind of want it to be able to stand on its own. You don't necessarily want to have someone necessarily have read the text you're writing about, or have done the science experiment that you're doing, or have studied the same concept in history that you're studying. In general, when you write, you want your writing to communicate what you know clearly and effectively, and the best your writing can be is that it would communicate that clearly and effectively to any audience ever, as long as they could understand the language that you're writing in. So we're going to look at this document just to get an intro to this idea. So I'm going to click this open and take a look. And we'll break this down together when it loads. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to start with this purple line up here. And here's what this line says. A mature writer writes in such a way that someone who hadn't read the question you're responding to, or the text that you're using as evidence, would understand what you're saying, that your writing can stand by itself and make sense to pretty much anybody. So let's pretend we have a given scenario, okay? Let's say you're given this passage from the book The Hunger Games, okay? So you have to read this passage. It says, we're on a flat, open stretch of ground, a plain of hard-packed dirt. Behind the tributes across from me, I can see nothing, indicating either a steep downward slope or even a cliff. To my right lies a lake. To my left and back, sparse piney woods. This is where Hamish would want me to go, immediately. Okay. So to someone who hadn't read The Hunger Games, a lot of things would be really confusing here. And if we're to try to think about, man, what would someone be confused by? What the heck is going on? That would be one thing. Maybe, what is a tribute? Who's Hamish? What's going on? Okay, so we have that issue sitting here. If we're going to use this text, any reader who reads our writing is going to maybe wonder about some of this stuff if we use it. Let's say if you got asked this question about this text. So let's say the teacher asks, what point of view is the narrator telling the story from? Explain, using complete sentences and at least one quotation blended with your words, including details that would let any reader understand what you're talking about. Okay, so if you got asked that question, which there's a lot in that question that it's asking you to do, how could you answer that? Well, an immature writing voice. And what I mean by immature is that when we're little kids, we don't tend to be able to think about the way other people are thinking. We don't tend to very well be able to put ourselves in the shoes of other people and kind of see things through other people's eyes. And as you get older, part of brain development, part of your brain growing, is that ability to kind of start thinking through other people's eyes, thinking from how would this be, how would this experience be, or how would my writing look to someone who's not inside my own head right now, someone who just picked this thing up. So an immature writer, someone who's not quite made those connections, would write kind of without thinking about their audience. They'd be writing just thinking about in their own head, well, this makes sense to me, so it must make sense to everybody. No, that's not the case actually. So an immature writing voice doesn't use context. The answer only makes sense to the writer. The person writes something like, the point of view is first person. When the text says I can see nothing, it is clear that the point of view is from one person who is participating in the story. And to be fair, this person totally understands what point of view is. In this case, they totally get first person point of view. But if we're talking about having a mature voice as a writer, well, let's say I come up and just pick up this piece of paper. The point of view is first person. And I'd be like, wait, what point of view? In what story? When the text says, what text? I can see nothing. I'm like, what? Who's I? What can't you see? I'm so insanely confused. It's clear the point of view is from one person who's participating in the story. okay, that part makes sense, but everything else going on up here, I have no idea what you're talking about. Here's an example of how a mature writing voice would be used to give context. A more mature writing voice knows that their reader probably doesn't have all the information that's in their head. And so they need to drop little bits of information to their reader to help their writing make sense. It says in the novel The Hunger Games, and we can assume any reader could pick this up and be like, okay, cool, I know what a novel is. I assume that The Hunger Games is a novel. By Susan Collins, great, even better, I can go look it up. The point of view used to narrate the story is first person. Okay, this totally makes sense to me. When Katniss, wait, who's that? The main character, oh, okay, cool, is thrown into an arena where she must fight other kids to her age to the death. What the heck? That's crazy. But it does make sense, like as a sentence. Okay, this sounds like a messed up book. The text states, I can see nothing. By using the word I to refer to herself, it is clear this story is being told from a first-person point of view. Whoa, that makes sense to anybody. Any person in the world could come along and pick up this thing all by itself, and this little piece of writing would totally make sense because the reader was careful and considerate of when you dropped a detail, would your reader know what that means? Well, maybe you need to add a little extra explanation to make sure they would understand those details. Learning how to do this is a skill that you're going to work on for the next couple of years. This isn't something everybody just dials the first time. It's a really hard thing because it involves balance and it involves judgment of figuring out, is this a detail my reader wouldn't know? Should I explain it a little bit? Or could I assume that my reader knows? For example, if you say the word novel, we should probably just assume that anybody knows what a novel is. Okay, like if you can read and you're like of an age where you would like be ready to talk about the Hunger Games, you should know what a novel is. However, if you say Katniss, well, let's not assume readers, everybody in the world knows who Katniss is. That might need to be explained. So adding those little extra details to give context to your evidence is one of the biggest things you can do to add more of a mature voice to your writing. And that's what we're going to work on in this assignment. Okay?